Okay, just while we're getting kicked up and the technology is coming online, are there any questions about assignment number 1? Are there any problems with that so far? No? Okay.
I'm going to find out if I can, my computer can go that far. Are you okay with that?
That's fine.
Just want to make sure.
No, it's fine, as long as I'm not tripping over it. And you don't forget that you've plugged it in down there.
Well, I'll remind myself one way or another.
Okay, all good. Can people hear me? Am I coming through on the microphone okay? Great. Okay, let's kick off. We seem to be getting fewer and fewer each week. That's all right. Small, concise group. How are we going with the tutorial so far? Have you gotten to grips with your rooms and who your tutors are? Yes? Some of you have already started your workshops this week. Some of you will be doing workshops tomorrow. Just a bit of a heads up for everyone. There is a class next week, so just to let you know, but the tutorials will be actually skipping a week, but we will have class. So just to give you a bit of a heads up, we'll still be here on a Thursday evening, unfortunately. But there are no scheduled tutorials for next week, given that we've got a short week with Friday, no tutes even on the Thursday. Are we clear of that? Don't turn up to your tute rooms for this particular subject next week. You'll be by yourself. Okay. How are we going with assignment number 1? Are we okay with that? You know what you have to do? You come to grips with it? Okay. How about the tutorial outline? Everyone has read the tutorial outline. That probably also means that you've read assignment number 2. Because those two go together. It's very hard to actually do a workshop without having read the second assignment outline as well. Have we got any questions on those? Okay, good. If you're not in a workshop group, when you go to your tutorials, have a word to your tutor immediately and ask them to help you get into a group, because many of the groups have already been set, so you'll probably be joining an existing group. I will leave that to you and to them to sort out between you. Okay, tonight we're going to talk a little bit about project initiation and scoping. So we're going to be taking a look at what we need to get a project underway, because this becomes one of the key things. Once we have identified who the stakeholders in the project are, and we talked about that last week, the next thing to work out is what those stakeholders actually want, and can we turn that into a requirement specification? Can we turn that into a scope for the project? So let's talk about getting a project started. So project investment selection, project initiation, and introduction to scope management. Now, projects just don't happen by themselves. You actually have to make a choice. And often there's an opportunity cost, because when you choose project A, that often means project B, you don't have the resources to do it anymore. So you'll have a bunch of money, a bunch of skills, a bunch of people, a bunch of time, but you might have 10 different projects to which you can devote those resources. You might have the ability to do 3. So what are you going to choose? Anyone have an idea here? Just toss out a couple of ideas. On what basis would you actually choose one project over another? Any thoughts? Yeah?
Urgency.
Urgency. Give me an example if you can.
You've got a deadline for next week for one project and one's in 6 months.
Okay. Brilliant example. You've got a deadline coming up, such as an assignment for a project management professional. Do you do that over another one that might be a week later? Yeah. Which one's going to make more money? Okay, we're now talking about enterprise investment, where we're putting money or resources into something. We want to get at least equivalent, if not more, hopefully a lot more, coming out the other end. Because otherwise, why would you do it? Why would you put in the same amount of money just to get that back again? Yeah?
So a balance between the time it's going to take to do the project, when the project's due, and how much we get from it?
Okay, so we balance up time, we balance up cost, we balance up benefit. All of these are good thoughts. But at the beginning, you don't necessarily have enough information. Because when you take a look at how an organisation runs, especially something to do with information systems, you'll tend to find that about 50% of the revenue that your company generates immediately goes back into the business, just to keep the business running. You have to pay people, you have to rent premises, you've got to pay your electricity and your air conditioning bills, you may need to get new equipment, you have to update infrastructure, you have to go and recruit more people if your building is, or your business is expanding. Then we have the next 30%, which goes into growing the business. Marketing, advertising. Can we get more business coming through the door if we do things in a different way? Can we create new product and develop new product that we can then take to the market and sell? Can we take old product and update it to the next version? I mean, Apple is up to what, the iPhone 6 by now? Samsung is up to, okay, 7. Samsung is up to 7 as well. Those two are in competition. Those types of things happen all the time. So we're looking to grow an existing, well-defined market. And then we have the little bit at the top, which is our venture capital. This is the stuff that we don't necessarily have a market yet. And this is about 20%. This is about transforming our business. This is about going into a market that we haven't touched before. I mean, Microsoft tried this when it got into games. I mean, Microsoft created operating systems, and then it started to do PC games. Apple was only known for the Apple computer and the Mac, and then it got into things like audio with iPods, it got into telephones, and it's actually taken those markets pretty strongly. Samsung only used to do television screens, amongst other things. Now it's got into video monitors and it's got into telephones, and again, it's actually quite a dominant player in that market space. So these are the things whereby we put money into not only maintaining our business and growing the business that we have, but we have to start up a new business or a new arm of the business, because this is where our future lies. The thing, especially with information technology, is that technology goes out of date. If all you're doing is expanding an existing business, that whole enterprise, that entire division of your company, within a period of time will be outdated. So you need to start up another part of your business to keep going. And when you're dealing with technology, that's about every 18 months. You need to keep having a future. It's not just good enough to keep cashing in on the present. So when you're looking at technology, this is basically the footprint of any enterprising business. Now, you've got a question that will be in front of you if you're a manager of a business like this. You've got a bunch of money that's devoted to your department or your division or the entire company that you might be running. Where do you put the money? What do you do in order to be able to keep your company operational? Do you need to pump it into your core because you've been neglecting that, and you need to make sure that people are getting their pay rises on time, otherwise they leave? Do you put it into growing your existing market and your existing product set, making it incrementally better, fixing bugs and doing those sorts of things? Or do you put money into trying to start up a brand new business? Because I will tell you, when you look at research and development style of projects, which is basically you're transforming the business in your venture, probably about 9 out of 10 of those projects fail. The one time it works pays for the other 9 and then some. Research and development by itself is the key to human progress, but the thing is you need some fairly deep pockets to be willing to have money pumped into 9 projects that don't go anywhere just to be able to get the one that does. So you need a very strong growth in order to be able to create a buffer to put into the venture side, into the R&D, the research and development. So what sort of project are you looking at? Are you looking at an infrastructure core project? Are you looking at a grow the business style of project? Or are you looking purely at a skunk works research and development style of project where you put a lot of money in with some capability and you're not too sure what you're going to get out at the end? How do you make those decisions? Well, you might be in a position where you've actually got to make these calls. So you may have to start thinking about what it really means from your own personal perspective, but also for the business within which you work. Because sooner or later, you're going to have to make these decisions. So let's take a look at the project lifecycle, and you will see this diagram or variations of it many, many times during the course of the next couple of months. I will keep putting them up pretty much every week. By the end of this particular subject, you'll be so sick of seeing these 5 phases of a project. But hopefully they would have sunk in. Define the project, plan the project, execute the project, close the project, and then take a look at what lessons you learn. These map the project from the start to the finish, and each phase has one or more tangible deliverables. If a phase doesn't have a tangible deliverable, it's not really a phase. You need to have something out to use as input to the next phase. If the phase that you are on does not create any output at all, it's not really a phase. It's not even a project. It has to have some sort of output. Now, every information system's worth its salt will do 3 things. Every single one. It'll do the same 3 things. It will take input, it will do some level of processing, and it will give you output. If it doesn't give you output, you've got a problem. The same sort of thing happens when you break it down to the phase, because in order to go on to the next phase, you've got to make sure the output from the previous phase is what you're looking for. So this is what's called a stage gate, sometimes called a phase gate or a go or no-go decision. This is the point where you decide, is it worthwhile continuing with this project or should we just stop it right here? Is it worth pumping money in? Because if I'm not going to get the output I'm looking for, then I won't sink any further resources into it. It's just a waste. So you make these decisions, but you've got to think that all of these things happen within a context. No decision happens in isolation. You need to look at what it is that you're trying to do. So there's a 4-step hierarchy when you take a look at which projects to choose for investment. The first one of these is, what does my strategic plan say? Where am I taking my business? What do I expect my business to do? What outcomes am I hoping for? If I were to project myself 5 years ahead and try and envisage what my business looks like, what do I think that picture will be? Then you do the business area analysis, because once you've got your strategy, then you take a look at the actual business that you're in at the moment and how it is operating. Where are the problems? Where are the opportunities? Where are the threats? Where are my strengths and my weaknesses? Where are the areas I could do better or that people keep complaining about? And where are the areas that they think we're doing brilliantly that I might be able to leverage to increase my market share? Once you've got your business area sorted out, then you take a look at the projects within that particular business area that can help you achieve the strategy that you're looking for. And then you take it down to the actual selection of the individual projects. And if you think it is a gamble, it sometimes can be, because, especially with technology, you don't know what the market's going to look like 18 months from now. You might invest a lot of your money into creating a product only to find one of your competitors gets there before you do. Or maybe you create a brand new product for your own market, only to find the entire market shifts and goes somewhere else. You'll very rarely find a computer store selling the big cathode ray tubes as a screen anymore. They're all flat screen. The big cathode rays are gone. Even when I look around this room, I see so many laptops and tablets out on display that you'd have to say that that is an absolute challenge to the desktop PC, and it is. So new markets are coming through based on the technologies we create. Understand your organisational goals and objectives. This is strategic planning. Establish a vision and a mission. What is it you want to do? How are you going to get there? What are the goals that tell you, if you hit those goals, that you actually have achieved part of the path that you're trying to follow? Craft up the strategies for each of those particular goals. Develop action plans that will make the strategies real. The detailed plan of what you do. Develop the roadmap to achieve all of the above. These are the steps that anyone doing business strategic planning will go through. After that comes business process analysis, because once you have your strategy, then you need to take a look at the first thing, what am I doing now? Because this is the platform on which I will be making my changes. I need to take a look at what I'm doing now, and I need to have a very, very good understanding of that. Otherwise, any project I implement or try and create will be built on sand. I remember one project I had a team of people working on some years ago, and I went to the CEO of this company. He was the one who started the company up. At this point, the company was probably about a decade old, and they created software that they all boxed up and then they shipped out. So they had big warehouses and all sorts of things. We were putting in a brand new system, or a big consultancy was, and they were using our software, and I was coming along to actually do some consulting on it. I was the director of my business at that point. So I went in and I had a word with the CEO. I had a meeting with him. And I got into discussion about how their warehouse management worked, and he gave me really detailed specifications of how their warehouse worked, how things were put onto shelves, how things were taken off shelves, how trucks and fleets of trucks delivered the materials that they would then use to create product and then put it back on the trucks to ship out to retail outlets. And how the logistics of getting from one warehouse to the retail outlet, the department store that would be selling product worked. So I sat there and I took copious notes. I had pages of these notes. And at the end I walked out thinking, I actually know what's going on here. I've got some really detailed information that I can pass on to my team. So then I went down to the warehouse itself, which was down in the basement. And I went and had a talk to the foreman who ran the warehouse down there, and trucks were coming in, trucks were going out. It was actually quite noisy and dusty. But I went and had a chat with him and said, look, I've just been to the CEO. I've had all of this time that he gave me, which was great. He's given me all of the operations on how the warehouse runs. And I said, I just want to confirm a couple of things with you in a little bit more detail. And he said, Grant, you'll want to confirm a little bit more than just a couple of details. And I said, why is that? He said, because we haven't used the CEO's plan for about 6 years. And we just haven't told him. Because it never worked. The CEO, who was running a business and started the business up, knew everything about this business when it was about a dozen people. This business is now about 500 people, and he had 2 major warehouses, shipping out to department stores and retail outlets. He had lost touch with how the business worked. The people in the warehouse themselves knew what to do, but this individual who was running the company was also rather dictatorial, a bit of a tyrant actually, and the guys in the warehouse knew that if they told him that they had departed from his plan because it never worked, they'd be looking for new jobs. So for the better part of 6 years, they had verbally told anyone who came to work in the warehouse how it actually worked. And it wasn't the plan that the CEO put in. That was sitting on a shelf collecting dust. It was about this thick, and he said, we haven't even opened it for about 3 years. And I said, okay, let me throw the notes away and we'll start over. So the first thing you have to do is get to grips with the people who are doing the job and find out what the company actually does. Not what someone many levels removed might think it does, or what it might have been doing 2 or 3 years ago. What does it do now? This becomes your as-is model. This is the structure of the business operation as it currently works today. And this needs to be fairly detailed. This is the platform on which you are building. The next thing you do is try and picture how you want it to look. What will it look like when this project is finished? A year, 2 years from now? What do we think that picture coming into view will look like? The third thing, you need to identify the changes to get from one to the other. How do I get from my as-is, my current model, across to my future to be the model I want to become? How do I get from the here and now across to the future? Because that's your project. Every project is about change. Every project is about going from where you are, destabilising your current state and moving to some sort of future state. It's all about that level of adaptation. So the idea of working out your starting point and your end point, and then the project sits in the middle to get you from one to the other. And if you don't plan it correctly, what you'll be doing is creating a path to nowhere. You'll be starting with your current system, but it will go off in a different direction than your 2B model requires. Yes?
How do you manage, so with that situation where you had disconnect between the CEO and frontline employees, how do you manage that? You have this one requirement, this one set of requirements that the CEO expects, and the one that you actually have to live with?
No, you can't do it that way. But you have to be very, very delicate, because if the CEO or someone with a fair degree of power has told you that this is the way it's set up, and they are having a degree of pride because they were involved in it, be aware that you are now going to take that away from them. Because you can't have a model that you tell your major stakeholders and your senior stakeholders while your operational people are working something different. Those two have to come into tune, and this becomes part of your project. When I said projects are about change, as soon as you start talking about implementing a project, someone's job, someone's knowledge, someone's capability will be altered. And you have to actually think about the human element coming in here. It's not about processes and mechanisms alone. There is an entire other side of that coin. Every single project is actually two projects. One of the mechanistic details that you go through, the processes that you're putting in place, the software that you're creating, the infrastructure that you're putting down. The other one is to get people used to the idea and get them all on the same page. Because remember what I was talking about last week, getting the stakeholders and meeting their expectations is very, very important. They will determine whether they think your project was successful or not. And that's often how you get paid, as to whether or not enough people think you were successful. So somehow along the way, you need to bring all of those expectations from many perspectives down to one. We have one target, this is what we're going for. So you better believe that a project manager has to have some very good people skills, because they will be talking 360 degrees. They'll be talking to the members of their own team over whom they have some direct power, but they also have to talk to key stakeholders over whom they have no power whatsoever. In many ways, those stakeholders are paying for you to be there, but you still have to influence them. So that's an interesting question that you ask, and it's a very pointed one. And it is often the one where people fall down, because they can deliver the best project in the world and everyone hates it because they didn't manage those expectations.
So how did you personally manage that for the CEO and the foreman?
With a great deal of delicacy. Let me say, the way that I did it was, I went back to the CEO and said, okay, well, we're going to be changing a few things, but you're an expert. I need your advice. If we're going to be doing this, what are your thoughts on it? And he said, oh, we could do that, we could do this. Okay, the warehouse guy said we should do that one, let me choose that one. And I'll tell him, that was your idea, that was great. And you build up this repertoire by answering and posing the right questions. Eventually, they take ownership of it because they think a lot of the things that you're doing came from their head. So you have sold a concept. You knew what you wanted to do. They were helping flesh it out, but they have taken ownership because you made it look like it was their idea from the start. And this is about managing that change to get from where they are to a new comfort zone. But you have to do it very delicately. If you say the wrong thing... This was a guy, by the way, who in the time that I was associated with this project, fired his managing director, fired his head of software, fired his head of logistics, You know, 3 of the people who sat on his senior management team within a 4-month period left the organisation because they disagreed with him. You better believe that's a very delicate individual to work with. So you need to be careful how your personal skills come into play. And if a project manager tells you, oh, I don't need to worry about people, then they haven't managed big projects. They haven't managed mission-critical projects. They haven't managed life-threatening projects. Because I can tell you from experience that when you start dealing with those levels of complexity, the biggest thing you've got to worry about is the people and the stakeholders. So, define a list of suitable projects that support your strategic objectives and your business analysis, and you ask them certain questions. And this is what's called the inception deck. This is the list of questions, and it will be different for every project. So when people talk about, oh, I've got my inception deck, what they're really talking about is saying, I've got a list of questions to which we need answers. What is the purpose of the system? What's its core functionality? What functionality is in scope and what is out of scope? Because out of scope is almost as important as what's in scope. Unless you define both to the best of your knowledge, people will make assumptions. If you haven't said explicitly that something, we're not doing it, it's out of scope, it's not part of this project, then often they will assume that yes, you are doing it and you're doing it for free because you didn't tell them that you weren't. So not only is putting a scoping requirement together about what is in scope and drawing those boundaries, it's also about removing assumptions. So you need to actually say what your assumptions are a lot of the time. And if you think something might be in a grey area, you need to explicitly make it in scope or out of scope. So please don't neglect that because it is actually quite important. I have been caught a couple of times myself with things that I thought were out of scope only to find partway through the project that others thought they were in scope. And I then needed to include them for no cost, or I had to convince them that it actually was outside of scope and we weren't doing it. And that brings up a whole new conversation. What does success look like? Because you need some metrics to measure whether or not you achieved your goals. If all of the metrics that you have are, it works, if that's the only metric you're working to, then you've got a problem because what works for some people may not necessarily work for others. One person wants a blue screen, someone else wants a green screen. Someone wants lots of pop-up windows and others just find that too distracting. What works for one group of people may not work for another. Different formats, different access, different ways of being able to process the goods. So you need to define what those are and what does success look like in order to be able to tick that box. How do you get a team together with the necessary skills and what skills do you require? How much money is available for the project? Because it's no use you creating a project plan for a $5 million project and only then finding out that you've got $2 million to spend. You will run out 40% of the way through the project without having achieved anything. Who's the customer? A lot of project managers, at least when they start out, think the project customer is the project team. They will go to their team and say, do you like this? Do you like that? It's not the project team. It's your key stakeholders. When you put your stakeholder matrix together, work out who the key players are. They're the ones that you have to keep happy. Going to your team is fine as a first step, but then you need to go wider. So who is the customer? Who's going to be using the deliverable? Is it people in the organisation, in a department? Is it a product that you're going to be selling out to the big, wide, wonderful world? Will it only be used in Australia or will it be used internationally? Was that a question?
Yeah. So what is the project you're working on, and you have an idea, and the idea is liked by the key stakeholders, but that's unethical for the public? How do you manage that?
Okay, so we have an idea for a project. The idea is very acceptable and liked by the key stakeholders who will be putting up the money, but it's unethical to actually roll it out to the public. My answer to that is, I don't know. What are you going to do? Because different people will have different responses to that. If I said, I'm going to offer you $300,000 to project the creation of a brand new missile guidance system, some people would jump at that as a great project, military project. working in an area with secure information with a very big income. That's terrific. Others would look at it and say, I'm going to be creating software that'll kill people. I can't do that. So that's a very personal decision as to whether or not you go ahead with that one. But this is why we talked about ethics last week, because you will be posed these sorts of questions, and depending upon your own particular points of view, it might be an attractive or an unattractive position to take. If the stakeholders like it, like if I was a military general, you know, creating a brand new missile system that does the job perfectly, I would love that concept. By all means, let's go ahead. But if I'm working for a humanitarian organisation, I might not think that's very good at all. Actually, I've got a nice little military film clip here I'm going to put up in a little while, so it's a good laugh. You can kind of sit back and eat popcorn for 10 minutes and have a bit of a laugh. But we'll get to that in a moment. Okay, remember, actions speak louder than words, so in spite of what people tell you, go and check the actual things that they do, because you'll often find that people miss out steps, assume steps, or forget steps. Yes?
Sorry, with the who is the customer, are you looking at that from both the perspective of you as the project manager or the project consultant, or as the group is developing for?
It depends on what position I'm in, because if I am a project manager, then the people who will be using the outcome of the project are my customer. If I'm sitting in the project, then the project manager is my customer, because that's who I have to keep satisfied. If I'm a customer who will be buying a product, then the organisation selling it has to keep them as the customer. So it depends on your position and the relationship to everyone around you. There is no cut and dried answer to any of this, unfortunately, which is why project management is one of the really, really interesting areas to get into if you're a bit of a stress bunny, because it's usually high stress, things keep changing all the time. You like working under pressure, you like working to deadlines, and you like being paid well for it, because all of that is true. The reason that people working in a project environment actually do get paid quite well is because there's quite a bit of stress associated with it. Yeah?
So in that, you're looking who your customer is.
Mm-hmm.
Should you narrow your view of who your customer is, or should you make it wider?
The wider you make your customer, the more expectations you're going to have to take into consideration, and therefore the harder it becomes to deliver that project in a way that everyone likes. So you need to define and understand who your important customers are. Because, again, if we take a look at our stakeholder matrix that we had up last week and our, who has the power, who has the influence, we need to decide, because you won't be able to satisfy everyone, you need to understand who are the key ones that we do need to work with. If it's a minor customer that has no influence, no power, is not putting up any money, who just wants an outcome in a certain way, but has no way of being able to influence that outcome or contribute to it, then they're not necessarily a powerful stakeholder. But the one putting up the money, the one who will tell you that you did a good job and whether or not this is a product that can be sold, yeah, they are very powerful. So you've got to make a decision as to who your customer is. The wider you send that net, the more expectations you now have to juggle. However, once you have decided who your customer is, you need to be very, very clear to everyone what requirements you're going to be satisfying, because not everyone will have this requirement satisfied. Okay, so project selection, prioritisation, resource allocation. Selection approaches. Here are some things that you need to consider. The concept of measurable organisational value. It's actually a key phrase. What it suggests is that you have to measure benefit. If you're putting $1 million into something, how do you determine that you got benefit from it? If I put $1 million into creating a project and 12 months later I get $500,000 back, does that mean that I've made $500,000 or I've lost $500,000? What happens if I choose a project that pays me nothing for 3 years, but then pays me a lot annually for the next 10 years after that? Can I keep my business going without having any income for 3 years, knowing that I'm going to create a revolutionary product in that 3-year window that will create a whole new market sector that I will own. Apple did this with the iPod. They put a lot of money into creating the iPod. And they ended up owning that market segment. NCR put a lot of money into developing auto teller machines. Now you see automatic teller machines in the foyer of every bank, in shopping centres, in garages. You see them everywhere. But the company that actually created all of that doesn't actually make them anymore. Selection approaches. So what is the measurable organisational value? Because not only do you need to create value, it's only recognisable if you can measure it. So here are some different ways of looking at it. Things like project financial analysis, net present value. If I create something by putting in $1 million, how much is it going to be worth in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? Return on the investment. If I put money in, do I get that back plus extra? Where is my break-even point? When do I make enough to say that I have invested $1 million, I've gotten $1 million back? How long is my payback period? Align it to a competitive strategy, such as I'm gaining or defending a market share. Apple and Samsung have this tug of war all of the time. So do Apple and Microsoft. Each one tries to be a little bit better than the other. If one of them gets ahead, then the other one puts a lot of money into trying to catch up. Weighted scoring methods, rating system based on certain internal criteria, because, I don't know, maybe you're working on military contracts, for example, and one of the things that you need to be able to weight or put a lot of emphasis on is accuracy and fit for purpose. So you can't create things that you know are going to break. And look, you know, in IT, whenever you create a software system, a new operating system, a game, there's always going to be bugs. Yes? Can you really get away with saying, oh yeah, look, there's bugs in it, but we'll fix it after? If the system that you're creating is a missile guidance system that might send the missile into a school in the opposite direction from where you want it to go. These are the types of things you may have to think about. In certain markets, in certain enterprises, and certain business, metrics may apply. Other metrics could apply differently in a different segment. And the balanced scorecard, which are basically the business drivers behind the metrics. What are we trying to do? Are we increasing market share in our existing market? Are we creating a new market? Are we looking for new customers? Are we looking to improve quality? Are we looking for a different rating from, you know, the consumer groups? What is it that we're looking for? Because that will help us drive our metrics. So this idea of measurable organisational value is about being able to measure benefit. And benefit from one may be different, for one project may be different from measurement of another. We've already talked about time urgency, and Olympic Games is a perfect example. With an Olympic Games, time urgency is the metric. Can you run the Olympic Games well? Can you run it from the day that it was supposed to start? Because going up to, you know, the organising committee and saying, hey, we're running a little bit behind, can we start the Olympic Games in 6 weeks instead? Won't fly. So these are the things that you have to take in. So why do project managers need to know measurable organisational value? It often comes down to money. Money is the driving force. Money can get you other resources. With enough money, you can buy skill sets, you can hire contractors. With enough money, you can buy the new technologies that you need as tools to create the technology that you're working on. So project managers need to know finance to be taken seriously. Now, if you walk into any project manager's pardon me, office or home study or whatever it is, take a look around. You'll see project management book after project management book after project management book after project management book. And you can tell the experienced project managers, because somewhere nested on that shelf amongst all of these project management books talking about Prince methodologies and agile programming and extreme programming and Gantt charts and all of these things, somewhere in there, maybe hidden away, is a single finance book. And that's all you need. You just need one. Having a finance tome of wisdom. You don't have to take on a full accountancy course here, but if you can take a couple of days at finance, it's actually a good thing. But it will tell you the terminology, so you can go and argue your case in front of a CEO or a sales director or a financial controller who might be the one controlling your project's budget. When you go and ask for more money for your project, you've got to put up a financial case for that. Why should they give you an extra $500,000? You're just running this project so badly that you're not bringing it in according to the original budget. Why should I give you more money to throw away? So you've got to be able to put up a case to say, I need another $500,000 to finish this particular project because, and it might be the market's changed, maybe the rates of the people that you're paying have all gone up, maybe you need to acquire a new level of technology to improve the quality of what you're creating, but you need to put it in financial terms. If you start talking in technical terms, and this is what a lot of IT and IS folks tend to do, they start talking their rationale in technical terms. Oh, this will, reduce the lines of code from 1.56 million to 1.55 million. Financial controller doesn't care. This will allow us to drop, response times from 1.30 seconds to 1.25 seconds. Financial controller doesn't care. What they care is, will this improve my bottom line by 20 to 25%? So then you need to understand what improves the bottom line for a company. How do they measure their bottom line? How do they measure improvements? Over what time frame? So when you start talking about this, most senior managers have a finance background of some description. So if you're a project manager, especially an experienced or senior project manager, you need to argue on their terms. You need to show that you can speak their language. Because if you don't, they won't give you the time of day. Greater than 50% of capital assets over 500 million are financed on a project basis. So if you're working on a very large project, if you're rolling out infrastructure all around the world, if you're building a new skyscraper or a new casino or a hotel or a highway or a railway, or even a new piece of technology like the Lightning Strike Fighter, which is now up to $1 trillion plus in development and still going in the United States, how do you argue those? Big projects are about money. What you put in, what you're going to get out. Understand the big picture, because money is the key to the strategic view. It's how you often measure it. And measures of project success usually come down to financial metrics. Spot the executive agendas, because you'll tend to find that finance people or senior people in companies also play politics. And this is one of the reasons that project managers need to know about it. They may not play politics to the same degree, but they need to be aware of when politics is being played on them. So any really good project manager will have a political awareness. They may not like playing politics themselves, and typically they don't, but they know when it's being played on them and they can respond. So you'll find the project managers actually have very multi-skill sets. It's not just about technical organisation or putting people on to create that bit of software or to build that app or whatever it happens to be. They can run the business. Again, depending what sort of business we're talking about. But they have the basic skill sets to build up towards that. I ran a business. I started technical, I went into project management, but I ended up running a business. I couldn't have done that without having a project management background. It taught me the skills I needed. Now, I never thought that when I got into project management. I just did it because I thought it was fun. And I wanted a big income because I saw the project managers being paid lots of money. And what I found is that it actually gave me a terrific training to be able to go beyond the project management role. So, projects are about measurable business value. Keep that one in mind. That is what you have to achieve. So, define the project goal. What are the benefits? What's the MOV? What's the feasibility study that you're creating? Business cases, success measures, approvals, authorities. In your workshops, you'll be creating reports based upon outputs from the workshops, and you'll be requesting approvals from the other 5 groups in each of your tutorials. There is a reason I'm making you do that. It might seem like it doesn't go anywhere. It might seem like it's just an overhead that you don't want to have to worry about chasing these people down to get a signature or an approval. However, it is something that you will do at every stage in a project. Get used to it if you're working in a project environment. And if you think it's difficult chasing down people in your own tutorial to approve your workshop outputs, take that to an organisational level. Believe me, you've got it easy. But it's all experience, okay? Then we plan the project. What, when, who, where, how, why, how much, how long. Requirements analysis, design, code, test and implement. That's the execution of the plan. Closing the project off, which is very important. You've got to get someone to say, yes, that's what I was looking for. We're done, we're finished. Reallocate your resources, close it off properly, put the notes somewhere, and then you need to evaluate post-implementation. What did we learn? What did we think we did well? What did we not do well? What can we take forward valuable into the next project? Very few project managers start from a clean slate. They will always pull out a project plan of a project they've worked on previously. Whenever they start a new project, they'll go looking for the project plan that is closest to their new project, and they'll use that as a base to start with. Then they'll go modify it. Very few project managers start from a single clean piece of paper. They always build upon previous knowledge. 3 documents you'll absolutely need to start a project. Every project will have a version of this. Maybe they'll call it different names, but they're always there. The first one is the business case, which can include a feasibility study, environmental impact statements, those types of things. But this is the reason we're doing it. This says we're going to get a business outcome. This is the reason the business is putting money into it. We have a project charter that says who's in control of the project, who has the various levels of sign-off, what are the strategies that we're going to employ for risk management, for change management, what are the high-level procedures that we'll be following through, how much money are we putting into the project, and why is that money one figure rather than another. So there's some rationale for the decision making. That's all in the project charter. It is basically your terms of reference. Then we have the scope statement that says what we will be delivering. These are your requirements. This is your requirement spec. These are the things that you absolutely have to deliver on a detailed level. Hopefully, if you deliver all of the requirements successfully, then your project overall is also regarded as successful. These 3 documents are always there. Sometimes you might see the scope of work or the scope statement called the requirement spec. Sometimes it'll be the scope of work. So there'll be different names for it, but these 3 documents in some version are always there. Business case. Context and background, business objective, current problem opportunity statement, why we're doing it, assumptions and constraints. Assumptions, very important, I said that before. If you do not put your assumptions on paper, people will assume something different. No matter how obvious you think it is, that no, we're not doing this. Someone will assume you will. Unless you say black and white, that's in, that's out. Basis for options, recommendations, project requirements, budget estimates, schedule estimates, risk estimates. You're going to be doing part of this for assignment number 2. I've kind of squashed some of these documents together to give you assignment number 2, at least an overview. I've called it a briefing paper for a board of directors, but what you're really doing is putting together a summary version of these 3 documents into one. Project charter, title, when you're starting, when you're ending, schedule information, some budget information, ownership, who the project manager is and who the key members of their teams are, what the project is meant to achieve, what its objectives are. Methodologies, control, change, communications, risk, budget, training, education, roles and responsibilities of the key stakeholders. If you want people to sign off things at different stages, you have to tell them. And you put it in here so they can see it in black and white and they can approve it. Yes, I am part of this project at this point in the project life cycle because I'm required to sign off on the budget, or I'm required to sign off on the success metrics or whatever they happen to be. Schedule estimate with milestones. I'll be talking about milestones in later classes. Believe me, they are very important. And the final closure sign-off. But you've also got sign-off at different stages of the project. Remember, we talked about stage gates. Each of those needs a sign-off. Scope statement. Name, characteristics. Again, assumptions tend to come up, but at this point they tend to be more detailed. Different people read 3 documents. The CEO and the senior business people will often look at the business case and maybe skim the other 2. The project manager and his team will look in detail at the scope statement and the requirements that they have to deliver, and they will skim the business case and they will skim the project charter. The project manager will be involved heavily in the project charter, but not necessarily all of the members of their team. So depending on what document you're looking at, there will be different levels of involvement. But obviously the success criteria are important because that's how you're going to be measured. Get those down, make sure they're clear, make sure they're specific, because if they're general, if they're open-ended, if there are shades of grey, if they're ambiguous, if they do not communicate well, I will guarantee you certain people, certain groups of people will just tell you you didn't satisfy the project. You didn't deliver what we wanted. Therefore, we're not going to pay you. Or we're not going to give you the bottle of champagne. Or you've got to go back and do another 3 months' work to deliver what we wanted rather than what you gave us. Because you didn't satisfy the metrics that were in their head because you didn't put them down on paper. You didn't make them clear enough. They have to be explicit. So areas to be planned. Again, I'm coming back to this diagram that I put up in the very first class, because these are the 10 areas that the Project Management Institute say you need to work on. And I'm going to be going through each of these class by class between now and the end of term. We've already talked about stakeholders. Tonight we've talked a bit about scope. We'll be talking about the others, time, cost, etc., as we move through later classes. Defining and controlling what's in the project and what's out of the project. This is scope management. Because once we have our scope, you've got to be able to manage to that deliverable. So, there are 5 steps involved in that. At this point, at the early stage of a project, you're only concerned with the first 3, but they're an important 3. Collect the requirements, go talk to people, work out what you need, create a requirements traceability matrix. Does anyone know what a requirements traceability matrix is? A requirements traceability matrix is just a list of what the requirements are. Specifically, can we achieve them, yes or no? You'll often see it come up in the project charter document, because it will say on this page in the document we are dealing with this particular requirement. If there are 12 requirements, then there will be 12 lines with discussion or with definition on your requirements traceability matrix. And again, in assignment number 2, I've asked you to create one because I want you to make very, very clear to the reader of that document what requirements you will be delivering and where they are discussed. Define the scope, which is a scope statement, plus variations or additions, and create the work breakdown structure. Scope baseline and work breakdown structure. We'll be talking about that in more detail as we move through as well. Verifying and controlling the scope come up a little bit later. They're important. They're part of scope management. I'm not going to go into detail on them right now. So, stakeholder metrics. We've talked about stakeholders already. So that top green matrix should be fairly familiar to you by now. This is just an example. Stakeholder being the sales manager. Interest, ticket sales, if this was an event. The influence is high. The role is that they sit on the steering committee. The objective is to create a profit in whatever time frame for $100,000. And the strategy is involved in creating an online ticketing system in order to be able to get that money. That's an example. That might become requirement number 12 on the traceability matrix. So there could be a whole list of requirements. There could be dozens of them. This one is requirement number 12. To create an online ticketing system, it's software. It will be referenced and talked about in both the project charter and the scoping statement or the statement of work. Its status is complete. Maybe we've already created this one. This requirement has been satisfied. We're now working on the other requirements as part of our project. But that, at the bottom in the blue, is a very simple requirements traceability matrix. Because what it shows is that we understand what requirements we have to deliver, and we can say tick or cross, yes or no, whether or not we've actually worked them yet. So, defining scope and management processes. Determine, agree work to be done and not done. Scope statement. Success measures, compliance with corporate policies and standards and a task list, process for controlling change. I'm going to show this video because it's a lot of fun and I kind of enjoy it. Okay, this is the bit where you get to sit back, rest, relax, put your feet up, bring out the popcorn and watch a movie. Okay, that is assuming I can get across to it. Okay, let me see if I can get the audio going here. Okay, we've got a problem here. I'm not too sure how this is happening.
Well, thanks to Bradley.
Okay, let me just roll it back.
That. So Bradley. Well, thanks to Bradley. Then what's this? What's the date? 1968. The question is, how did they get to that? From this.
Gentlemen, our mission was to design and implement an infantry transport vehicle that would be a worthy replacement for the M113 armored personnel carrier. We have met that objective and then some. The Bradley armored personnel carrier will bring troops to a combat zone swiftly, efficiently, and safely. It will hold 11 men, plus a driver, and features a 20-millimeter cannon, which will provide ample firepower and at the same time flexibility. Lightly armored, speedy, and solidly engineered, our troops will be arriving at the battlefield in the very finest American technology has to offer. And at $1.5 million per, a real bargain.
Nice work, Colonel.
Outstanding. Damn impressive.
In other words, it was designed to be a big taxi cab, drive guys to the battlefield and go back home.
But how did it end up with a turret on top of it?
Well, this is all well and good, Colonel Smith, but...
Something wrong, General?
Well, with this gorilla in production, I don't suppose there's going to be anything left in the budget for my scout.
Doubt it, Bob. You don't need scouts. You have radar, air recon, satellites.
You always need a scout. And you know what I'm thinking? Why couldn't this thing serve as a scout?
But it's a troop carrier, you know.
But this is a speedy vehicle. Why can't it be both?
Well, for one thing, it's too big. And for the other, you can't really see out all that much from inside.
Sounds like a design flaw to me.
Design flaw? No.
No, we'll just stick a turret on top with lots of opticals.
But then, sir, it'll be even bigger.
Well, what's your problem, Smith? Not elegant enough for you?
Well, the thing is, General, it's kind of hard to do a sneak and peek when you're over 10 feet tall.
He's got a point, Bob.
Well, all I know is we need a scout. This is fast enough to do the job, and it's funded.
Well, actually, we're a hair over budget.
You turned the Bradley into a scout. We're going to be selling them off to some El Presidente de Chimichanga in no time. Anything for surveillance ends up south of the border before the paint even dries.
When you nailed that anti-aircraft gun, who backed you up on that?
You did, Bob.
And who testified to appropriations on behalf of that gun?
You did, Bob.
I'm talking to appropriations next week. Now, do I sell you on my scout or do I not?
You did, Bob. And how about some portholes along the side for individual firearms, so the fellas can stick out their guns and shoot people?
Good. And you know what, Colonel? We already have the turret. We ought to get the biggest bang we can up there.
I'm sorry, bang, sir?
You can't hurt anybody with that pansy-ass gun. Add on some firepower.
Where am I supposed to fit the extra ammo?
I don't know. Can't you just shift things around? Make some room.
You already got 4,400 rounds of machine gun ammo. Now you want to add 25mm shells.
General wants his ammo.
You can't have his ammo, not unless he runs alongside this thing carrying it.
Well, can you just squeeze it in?
No.
Oh, come on, just squeeze it in.
We're not trying on Levi's here, Colonel.
Are you telling me that in a vehicle this size, you can't find room for a few rounds of ammunition?
Not in its current configuration, no, sir.
So the configuration's wrong. There must be something you can dump.
Dump, sir?
Something you don't need.
General, the interior is very spare. Besides the ammunition and the men.
Maybe you can leave one of the fellows behind. Put the ammo where the men go.
Sir, it is a troop carrier.
So, make a couple extra trips. What's the difference?
They want a transport that doesn't carry men, and a scout that's got a cannon as big as a tank's on it.
And portholes.
Oh, great! Portholes. So the guys can shoot at whatever they can't hit with their cannon.
You don't have to buy the damn thing, Jones. Just draw it. That's one hell of a cannon.
That's the problem.
Why?
You go out in the battlefield with this pecker sticking out of your turret, and the enemy's gonna unload on you with all they got. Might as well paint a big red bullseye inside.
But it's a troop carrier, not a tank.
Do you want me to put a sign on it in 50 languages? I'm a troop carrier, not a tank. Please don't shoot at me.
This was going to be so beautiful.
That's good work, Smith. Looks perfect to me.
Thank you, sir.
Thing is,
Yes, General?
looks a little like a tank with that cannon on top. Probably gonna draw more fire.
Actually, sir, that has come to our attention.
We know it's not a tank, but we'll the other side.
I guess we could always thicken the armor, toughen up the hide a bit.
Colonel Smith, could you explain why you put those portholes there?
Yes, sir. As per your request, so the men could shoot out at the enemy.
You're joking, aren't you?
Besides, portholes? What are we in now, the Navy? Say, you think you could make this thing amphibious? You know, get the troops across a river?
No. No, sir. No. No.
Amphibious? The Bradley's supposed to swim?
In theory, at least.
Amphibious troop carrier slash scout slash tank. Couple more months, I bet they can get this thing to fly.
What's this in the margin? Please help me. I am losing my mind. RLS.
Lieutenant Colonel Robert Laurel Smith, head of oversight and development.
Aluminum. This thing's got an aluminum skin. Huh? Anything an enemy tank fires at is gonna go through it like a hot knife through butter.
We're doing the specs on using steel rather than aluminum. Of course, steel is much heavier than aluminum, so it won't go as fast.
No, we can't lose speed. If we lose speed, it won't work as a scout vehicle. It won't keep pace with the M1 tanks either.
Thicker armor's a reactive measure. Let's think proactive here. I say equip the thing with anti-tank missiles. Then it can blast those enemy tanks before they get a chance to fire. What do you think, Colonel?
Fine!
Anti-tank missiles?
Oh, no.
Where do I put them? The men will have to wear the missiles as hats.
I don't know, Jones. That's why you get paid the big bucks.
Colonel, there's no room. We're not talking
Got a
about...
pair of Levi's. I know. God damn it! we are talking about is 11 years with nothing to show for it. Except an ulcer the size of the District of Columbia and a career that's on permanent hold. You see this? I've been a bird colonel so long, I swear I'm growing feathers. Now, if you have to design hats to hold those goddamn missiles, then just do it.
Just as an observation, you might notice when the movie started, he had a full head of hair.
If you'd all just take your seats. Thank you. We are pleased to present a scale model of the new Bradley fighting vehicle.
Supposed to carry?
11. Bradley is outfitted with the most sophisticated surveillance equipment ever developed. It is also equipped with a rapid-fire cannon and an anti-tank rocket launcher.
Which means it's loaded with 1,500 shells and 10-tow anti-tank missiles.
So in summation, gentlemen, what you have before you is
a troop transport that can't carry troops, a reconnaissance vehicle that's too conspicuous to do reconnaissance,
and a quasi-tank that has less armor than a snowblower, but has enough ammo to take out half of DC.
Fantastic. Congratulations, General Smith. General? Hell of a job. General. Let's build it.
They're building it? This is what we're building? I don't get it.
What?
So I just thought that was a little bit amusing to kind of put you in the picture of how scopes tend to change and how important it is to get it right at the beginning. I'm going to show you one other little video here because we've got a couple of minutes, so I'm just going to fill it up. It's not very long. It's actually much shorter than that one. This is a little bit later in the project where they want to be able to do testing to make sure that they've achieved their requirements. So what this gentleman here has decided to do was to test it with sheep. So let me find this particular one.
Yes.
Major says just called, sir.
Uh-huh. When do they plan to run the test?
Immediately, just as soon as we send over the sheep.
We? I thought they were in charge of the sheep.
They say it's being handled at our end. The Surgeon General's office.
What does the Surgeon General have to do with sheep? Excuse me, you must be Colonel Burton.
We were told you might show up.
Who told you that?
Colonel Buck, he established his office last week with the Surgeon General.
You're the one who's trying to kill the Bradley. Who told you that?
I'm sorry, sir. All information in this office is classified.
So, what is ruminant procurement anyway?
That's what this office has been created to do.
Yeah, but what is it?
The analysis and policy determination for the parameters about which will be tendered research data on the optimal test ruminants. Such ruminants are to be
sheep. You're talking about sheep. You're in charge of buying the sheep, correct?
We can't just go out and buy sheep, sir.
And why not?
we're doing a vaporifics test on sheet. I mean, vaporifics is all about what happens when a warhead penetrates armor. The metal particles vaporize and form a large fireball that fills the troop compartment.
I know what a vaporifics test is. I'm the one who called for it.
Oh, then you know we have to have sheep specs before we can proceed.
Sheep specs.
What is sheep specs? Specifications. Shorn or unshorn? Rams, ewes, or lambs? Merinos or short hair? I mean, shorn merino ewes or unshorn merino rams? Bighorns or domestic? Domestic shorn lambs or bighorn unshorn?
Just how long will it take you to get your sheep specs?
Not long at all. 6, 8 months tops. And then we can go to tender on the research debt. But then we'll require another 8 months to evaluate the data, after which we can move into prototype ruminant evaluation.
How much?
Well...
I must admit, I find that one amusing. Sheep specs. Okay, moving on. You need to create a work breakdown structure which actually gets you to the fulfillment of a requirement or a sub-requirement. In other words, you need to break down the bigger task into many, many smaller ones. There's an example of a work breakdown structure there for developing a project plan. So you start at level 1, develop the project plan, you take that to 1.1, create the work breakdown structure, and then 1.1.1 and 1.1.2, and so on and so forth. This is the detailed plan of how to get to the end. You'll also notice, looking here, that certain things at the end of each of those subphases get highlighted. There is a milestone. They're in bold for a reason, because at each of these steps there is a tangible deliverable that we can measure whether or not the previous steps, the combination of those steps, was completed successfully. Complete the project plan, finalise a budget, cost baseline. We should be able to show these documents if we have them. But this is what's called task decomposition, taking a big task and breaking it into smaller ones. Now, you do this every single day. You did it to come here tonight because from wherever you were 2 hours ago, you needed to work out a mental plan of how to get to your chair tonight. So if you were home, you needed to work out what you needed to bring to university. You needed to work out the transport. You're going to come by car, taxi, you're going to catch a train, you're going to come by bus. How do you get to the bus train station? How do you get from, work out what stop you get off, if it's down here at Central or is it further up? How do you get from that location to here? Do you have the ability to get here in time? When you get here to this particular location, which seat do you choose to sit in? You've got a mental task list of all of the things that you need to do. And you actually execute those tasks in order, because you can't sit in your seat until you've left home. So sitting in your seat has a number of tasks before it, starting with leaving home. You can't walk from Central Station until you've actually done the train trip to get here. So you understand how this works. You're actually project managers. You know how to do a work breakdown structure, except now you've actually got to do it deliberately, because up until now you've probably been working through these plans in your head without even thinking about it, because you've been doing it every day of your life. Now, in a project environment, if you're asked to create a work breakdown structure, you have to think of the very specific, detailed steps that you're going to have to do. And if you miss a step, the deliverable does not work. Now, believe me, that is a challenge, because people will tell you different things. People will have assumptions, steps that they have forgotten about that they don't tell you to write down. So you've got to go through and make sure that your work breakdown structure is as detailed as you need it to be. And hopefully at the end, you're able to execute all the steps in the work breakdown structure and get to the end of your project successfully, just as you got here to sit in these chairs tonight. So developing a work breakdown structure, use specified guidelines. Usually if you're dealing with contracts or requests for tender, they will have some guidelines that you can follow. Analogies, copying similar past projects. I mentioned that no project manager, experienced project manager, starts from a blank sheet when they create their project plan. They will go back at other project plans that they've been involved in or other projects, and they will look for something close enough that they can use as a starting point when they start documenting this project. Top down, start with the largest task and break it into smaller ones, and then smaller ones, and then smaller ones. The bottom up, aggregate known tasks into summary tasks. So if you have a list of 12 or 20 tasks, over the top of that you'll have a heading which will summarise what those tasks are about. Mind mapping, which is branching out from a core idea and then grouping tasks. So I'm not going to go through that video. You can have a look at it in your own time. It just tells you or gives you some advice on how to create a good work breakdown structure. Then we come to project termination, which is a question about what happens if the project doesn't go ahead. Is a cancelled project the same as an unsuccessful project? Anyone give me an answer to that one? Yes?
No, it's cheaper.
It's cheaper? So a cancelled project is cheaper than a terminated project?
Well, if you cancel it early, it means that you're not wasting all that money trying to make it work, and then, oh, it's still a...
That's exactly right. A project can be cancelled and a project can be terminated. They may be the same thing. The project might be terminated because it was cancelled, but there is also a chance that a project gets cancelled for other reasons outside of the project. Maybe the market has changed and what you're building is no longer able to be sold. Maybe your company has just acquired another company and they already have a tool or a product that does what your project was meant to create. If they've already got it, why have this project go forward? We can stop it here. So you need to take a look at the reasons why the project was cancelled, because sometimes you need to put up an argument saying, I'm not a bad project manager, because a lot of times when a project is cancelled, the natural assumption is that it was badly run and that was the reason. That's usually the one people go to most often. So if you're trying to put a case together to substantiate your work up until now and to support your team, because their jobs might depend upon you putting the best face on this that you can, you may have to give some reasoning as to why this project finished here. And it was for valid business reasons, not necessarily because the project itself was bad. So think about the reasoning behind some of that. A few key thoughts were coming up on the end of tonight. Project investment is about measurable organisational value. It's about benefit to the business. That's the reason the business is funding it. That's the reason they're giving you the money. That's the reason that you're doing this job. No company is going to give you a project and a bunch of money just because. You actually have to have reasons, and there's going to be an expectation of a return on that investment. Projects, especially software projects, are non-routine and therefore uncertain and risky. Software projects are different to engineering projects. Engineering projects usually start with a lot of planning at the beginning and then they try to keep to that plan all the way through. Software projects, we know in this particular game, things are likely to change, because at the beginning of the project is when we know least information about the project. Lots of things about how this project will eventuate, we won't know until we're in the middle of it. The best we can say at the beginning, maybe this deliverable isn't for 2 years. We can put a bunch of money behind it, we can do some planning, but we know that we have to make an allowance in there for things to change. Because even if nothing else changes, the market itself will change in 2 years. With information technology, 18 months to 20 months is about the usual time frame when the next generation of technology comes out. If you've got a project that goes for more than 2 years, which is 24 months, you can guarantee that a technology change has happened in the middle of your project. So what you are now delivering is one generation of technology out of date. Can you take that to the market and sell it? Because if the answer is no, you might find that your project now gets cancelled. Project objectives provide focus for everyone. We know what we're looking at. Make sure you involve and understand who the stakeholders are and what they're looking for. Politics will change. Scope controls what in and what's out, because that's equally as important. Document your major decisions, especially the ones needing sign-off, because you will be coming back to that. That's your protection. Those documents, whether you realise it or not, are your insurance policy. Because when someone says, why did you put portholes in the side of my troop carrier, you can go back and say, we have it on record that you're the one who asked for them. Otherwise, they'll blame you for it. You can only trade off scope versus time versus cost versus quality. Those four things will fluctuate. You move one, the others will also move. Plan well, keep on planning. Planning is an iterative thing. It doesn't work if the only plan you create is at the beginning of the project and then you will assume that you can keep to that all the way along. No. I can guarantee you, if you start the project on Monday at 9 o'clock with a perfect plan, by 15 minutes past 9, you're going to be making changes to the plan. Take it as a law of nature. Okay, project investment selection, initiation, project management, some references. There's another couple of clips here that you can look at in your own time. They're actually quite interesting. The one about the building of the Titanic from a project management perspective, it doesn't have any sound, but it's actually quite interesting. And there's also an interesting talk by a senior Google developer. I'll leave you guys to look at that in your own time. There's a quiz here with 11 questions. As I've said before, I tend to go in and pick questions from these lists to appear in the final exam, or variations of them, but these are good examples. And we're done. Are there any questions? And I'm even 5 minutes ahead of time. Okay. I look forward to seeing you all next week. Remember, we do have election next week, even though we don't have tutes. Enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy your weekend.